Good evening. I welcome you all to the January 14th meeting of the Zoning and Design Review Board for Yountville. We will begin by calling to order and doing a roll call. Cammie, will you do the roll call?
Members Cook. Here. Henthorn.
Here.
Toposky.
Here.
Vice Chair Zagorczyk.
Here.
And Chair Miller.
Here.
All members are present.
All right. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of the minutes from our December 10th meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you.
Could we ask for public comment just in case anyone has comments on the minutes?
On the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody? Thank you. Motion?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I second it.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. Are there any public comments that are for something that is not listed? No. All right. We'll move on. Presentations. There are none. Public hearings. We will move to item 8A, consider adoption of a resolution recommending the town council conditionally approve preliminary and final master development plan, tentative parcel plan, and use permit for a two-story mixed-use building, residential and retail, and owner occupancy of one residential unit, tree removal permit, master sign plan, and CEQA exemption for a project located in the vacant lots on the corner of Humboldt and Jefferson Streets at 2010 through 2012 Humboldt Street. Aaron.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Miller. So I just wanted to say a few words so that everybody's on the same page. So the adopted 2019 general plan changed the subject property's land use designation from Old Town Historic to residential scaled commercial. The comprehensive zoning code update that followed changed the zoning from to residential scaled commercial as well to be consistent with the adopted general plan, and that's in accordance with state law. Both require at least 2 second-story residential units. And these adopted policies, designations, and requirements are not up for debate or modification as part of this pending application. So I think everybody should be aware of that. Additionally, the applicant emailed out a letter late yesterday afternoon describing a 5-unit revised project concept. And while the ZDRB can comment on this concept if they wish to do so, depending on what the applicant asks for, the project pending before the board this evening is the 3-unit project that was formally submitted and that is described and analyzed in the staff report and supplementing materials. So just wanted to make those points, and I'll ask Town Attorney Anderson if she wants to say anything about the Housing Accountability Act.
Oh, sure. Just to give some context to the correspondence you received last night, if the applicant chooses to submit the revised version of the project that was circulated, that would be subject to the Housing Accountability Act and Density Bonus Law, which you all learned about and became familiar with through our prior project with the 1980 Crossroads property. So that's the context to analyze this current proposal against.
And so with that, I'd like to turn this over to Carrie Svanstrom, the case planner for this project, who will be presenting the staff report.
Good evening.
I have a point of order. I'm trying to understand which project we're reviewing, which one submitted, what's changed. I'm just trying to figure out what we're talking about.
The project before the board tonight is the one that is in the staff report, that is on the website. That is the project that is being discussed this evening.
Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, Chair and board members. The
as we have up on the screen, the two sites that are the subject of tonight's hearing, 2010 and 2012 Humboldt Avenue. They are currently vacant, and once combined will be about a 10,846 square feet. The applications, I'll go through slide by slide to walk you through the staff analysis on those as part of this presentation. The project that's before you is the 2,413 square feet retail on the first floor and the 3 residential units on the second floor, which equate to about 2,437 square feet. So that's the project that was submitted. A little bit, I know Erin gave a little bit of background on the general plan and zoning ordinance. Were actually a few what were called change areas in the general plan, and I know a few of you were actually on the board during the general plan, but not everybody here or in the room was, so I wanted to give a little bit of background. So there were several change areas. The Humboldt, these 2 parcels, was one of those. There were several discussions in 2018 and throughout the general plan process that was led up to the 2019 adoption of the general plan update, which changed the sites from Old Town to residential scale commercial, partially because of their connection to Washington Street and wanting to make the Washington Street corridor support that with and what was required for the site was pretty specific in the change areas. It required a mixed-use project with limiting a number of the commercial uses a little bit beyond what was in the residential zone commercial, but mostly what is already undertaken in that. It did require a 2-story building with a minimum of 2 units on the residential units on the upper floor, and that was to ensure that there was no loss of residential units from the 2 single-family parcels that were the previous zoning. The design context also had some information that the design should be oriented towards the corner and front on Jefferson, that the parking should be accessed from Humboldt Street, and that the parking should be behind the building or behind the building fronting on Jefferson. It encouraged shared parking, and it did have some notes about the design that it should mitigate the noise, and it did that through limiting the uses as well as the entry, and then obviously the building itself. It encouraged breaking up the massing through balconies, awnings, step backs, and variation in the roof planes. The project was, so that was part of the general plan adopted in 2019. As Erin noted, the rezoning to this residential scale commercial happened in 2020. And there were 3 specific components that were site-specific criteria that were adopted into the zoning ordinance for these parcels. One was that it be a minimum 10,000 square foot lot. The general plan background, when you listen to the discussions, was basically to make sure that there weren't 2 small parking lots with access, and that it was really designed and built as a single project. And a merger will be required as part of this project. That's in the conditions of approval. Again, the minimum of 2 second-story residential units. The housing element actually under the zoning identifies 3 as the sort of likely number for the site, but the minimum zoning is 2 and the maximum is 16 units for the 2 parcels. And then it prohibits certain commercial uses, which I won't get into because they are certainly compliant with that component of it. So the project before you tonight, again, is a retail in 2 spaces on the first floor, one that faces the corner and one that is accessed off of Humboldt. 3 2-story second residential units. For that, 2 of those would be 1-bedroom units with a den, and 1 would be an affordable, a deed-restricted studio unit. There's 14 parking spaces behind a porte cochere, along with site landscaping and replacement trees. A little bit about the project history. It was first submitted in March of '23. Staff did several iterations and reviews working with the applicant. They did bring this to the ZDRB last in June of 2024. The application at the time wasn't complete, but there was enough information that staff felt it would be helpful to get ZDRB guidance and input to both staff and the applicant. And so some of that is detailed out in the staff report, as well as how the applicant responded to that. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I got a message. I guess there's some people in the YouTube stream who aren't able to access. Is that an issue? Just wanted to.
Our IT systems administrator is working on
Okay.
it. Thank you for
All
letting
right.
us know.
Thanks. Sorry for interruption.
No, great, perfect. The application after the June hearing was resubmitted in August. We have been working with them since then, and the application was deemed complete in December, as is before you tonight. Just to review some major revisions, there are now 3 residential units. Previously, there were 2 two-bedroom. There is one of those units is suggested to be a deed-restricted unit at affordable to a low-income household. They are looking at doing a condo map after they merge the parcels. They've also requested a use permit for owner occupancy of one of the dwelling units, and that cannot be the affordable unit because that would kind of be contradictory. They have the details for the master sign permit included in this application. And they have reduced the retail space so that there is no second floor retail use. There was, I believe, some storage and office space previously, but that has been eliminated as the project was reduced by about 600, a little bit over 600 square feet. So there's no second floor retail. There is also no second floor open space that is part of that commercial. It is all the private open space at this point. And then they did design modifications that I'll review, and then the parking and the top floor percentage of the total area now conform. In the June hearing, they had asked for master plan deviations for both of those elements. So just to review the entitlements that they are requesting, master development plan is required for any large entitlement. It allows the town to review the overall site plan and design of the project. And it kind of works in tandem with design review, which I'll discuss in a little bit. The master development plan has several criteria, but it does also allow for deviations from development standards based on the particular site as part of the review process. This project is requesting 2 deviations. Again, they've eliminated both the parking deviation they had previously, as well as the top floor percentage of square foot exceeding what was allowed. The 2 they're requesting, one is a front setback deviation. The front setback is on Jefferson Street. And a 15-foot is required. They are proposing a 10-foot instead of that 15-foot setback. Staff, in reviewing the application, notes that the frontage itself between the curb and the building is 17 feet. And so perceptually, it will have that kind of same setback that other properties with a 15-foot setback would be required to have. Their request is to be able to provide the retail space and meet the parking requirements. Obviously, the building with the parking is a certain width to make those work. The second deviation is a floor area ratio. They are requesting 0.475 instead of 0.4. The first floor does meet the 0.25 commercial standard if it was a commercial standalone project. The zoning allows for an additional 0.15 FAR if you have either office or residential as part of a mixed use. And so their second floor does exceed that. It's 0.24. So basically that equates to an additional 811 square feet, just to kind of put it into layman's terms of what the ask is. And the request for that is to provide both the deed-restricted affordable studio unit as well as the 1 bedrooms at the just over 1,000 square feet as they're proposing. And I guess staff's analysis on this, again, is that the front setback is, the actual curb to building is still going to be larger than the 15 square feet that is required for that. And then I'll talk about the affordable housing that they're providing in a moment. They are proposing, as noted, the two parcels will be required to be merged. And then once that is done, they are requesting a tentative parcel map to create three condos. Condo 1 and 2 would be the one-bedroom units, and then a third condo would be both the retail, all of the first floor space that isn't the two garages for the condos. So the parking, the retail, as well as the studio unit on the second floor, which is connected on the Humboldt side. And then, of course, they would have a open space common area that would be required as part of that by the town engineer. The condos does need to conform with the state Subdivision Map Act, as well as the local ordinance, and our town engineer, John Farrell, has reviewed this for compliance and has some additional conditions in the conditions of approval, and he is here tonight if you have any questions on that. For the use permits, the two use permits that are required for the project, one is to have a mixed use in the residential scaled commercial zoning district. And that's to ensure that the mixed-use project is of an appropriate intensity for commercial use, that there's no negative impacts, and that it's consistent with the town's goals. This is being proposed as two small local serving retail spaces, and so staff is supportive of this mixed-use project and feels that it meets all of these criteria. The second is for owner occupancy of one of the dwelling units. The general plan and zoning ordinance do want to make sure that the units are available for rent for the most part, but do allow for owner occupancy of one of the units. And they have applied for that. And again, this would be one of the market rate one-bedroom units, not the affordable unit, which would be subject to fair housing requirements and rental to non-owner. In terms of the affordable unit, I do have on the screen where that is. It's a studio unit that is accessed from the Humboldt side, and it also includes the area above the porte cochere, which would be every residential unit is required to have private open space in the zoning ordinance. And so, although it's a small unit, it would have a very nice, fairly large private outdoor space that would be dedicated for that unit. The deed restriction, so this is a voluntary, it's not part of inclusionary as a requirement. It's something that the applicant is voluntarily providing. And it was sort of associated with the request for the FAR adjustment, deviation, to be able to provide this. It would be deed restricted for a minimum of 55 years, and it would be affordable to low-income households. And I kind of put that in there because this is always a question, what does that mean? Since it's a studio unit, if it was a one-person household, that would be someone making between $51,000 and $82,000 a year. Moving on to the design review, I won't go through these in detail, but the June design review hearing that the ZDRB commented on, there were a number of comments. It's centered on breaking down the mass, looking at the scale of the building, and providing building articulation, particularly building articulation that allowed for transitions to the residential beyond. Some of the project modifications, and I have a couple of, I put in the June because I know June is actually 6 months ago. It's a long time ago, right? What did that look like? So I did include the June elevation along with the current elevations for Jefferson and Humboldt so that you could see these. In terms of the massing changes, they've reduced the overall height for the flat roof portion from 27 feet 4 inches to 26 feet. They did change the large corner element that was straight across at 30 feet to be a gabled roof, as well as to have a step back from the corner entry that includes includes both a window, so it's not a blank wall on that second floor, as well as planting opportunities within the step back. On Jefferson Street, they've introduced breaks every 30 feet, along with additional articulation. On the Humboldt Street side, they have a setback for that second floor, both, as I said, both at the corner, but also on Humboldt, that serves as the entry to that exterior entry to that studio unit, and a little bit of a balcony. The porte cochere on the east side was a 2-story wall that has been reduced to 1 story, and they additionally have added a step down on that side for additional planting opportunities. The overall size of the building has been reduced by about 677 square feet. And with that, the parking now complies. There are 14 spaces, 12 of which would be shared, and 2 of which would be the individual garage units that would have actual garage doors for the condo units. Additionally, in terms of transitions to the adjacent properties, they have increased the north setback by a couple of feet. They've changed and added a number of plantings, including podocarpus, which is a evergreen, fairly sturdy and vertical plant along the north and east. They've revised the north windows to be clear story, so that they have basically a 5-foot sill height for privacy, so that you're not, normal people's eye height, you're not going to be either standing in a window, or if you're like me, you're 5 foot, you won't even see out the window. It'll just be a way of getting light and fresh air into the building. The courtyard units along Jefferson are screened by the residential to the north. Previously, there had been balconies, outdoor courtyard balconies all along the east side. And so this actually will protect the courtyard in terms of noise and additional privacy in terms of visual privacy. Again, they've reduced the porte cochere and stepped that second balcony, back so that it doesn't go all the way to the property line in terms of, being to look over and peer into your neighbor's yard. Additionally, the property line fencing previously was an 8-foot concrete fence, a very commercial look. They have changed that to the sort of normal 6-foot residential fence. They are looking to use painted steel with the horizontal slats. And then they have split the garbage areas so that the north side serves both the 2 one-bedroom units, and then the retail and the studio have their refuse area just inside the porte cochere, where all the cans would come out onto Humboldt Street, so that those are split, and there aren't so many on garbage day, recycle day out on the street. And then in terms of materials, and I'll let the applicant get into some of these as well, they did have sort of a steel storefront look before, which ZDRB comments were that it was very commercial looking. They have changed to be, and they've got a couple of references in town, but to have that all the windows be wood inset into the stucco. Additionally, they've added window boxes and awnings on the second floor, awnings on the first floor. So the second floor would be steel just for maintenance, and the first floor would be fabric awnings. And then they've added additional detail that I think the applicant will be talking about in terms of the frontage for the 2 retail spaces. They're still looking to use the vintage door that everyone liked from June and have similar detailing on the flower shop for that second space. some of the other entitlements, there is a proposed tree removal. There is one regulated tree. It is a California walnut in the northwest corner, which is a little sad looking and has been deemed to be in poor health, poor condition by the arborist. It would require replacement under the town's code of a equivalent of 24-inch diameter, and that can be done with multiple trees that are 3-6 inches, adding up to 24. They are looking to do scarlet oak trees for interest, both the color in the fall as well as the growth that they have is a lot quicker than coast live oak or other oaks. And then the landscaping in the parking lot, where there isn't quite as much space, would be crepe myrtle. And then they have the magnolia within the inset on Jefferson Street. Lastly, the master sign permit. This is actually a pretty easy one in my mind. They are allowed 63 square feet, which is pretty large square footage. Their signage is very minimal. They're proposing 15 square feet between the two signs that they would have, about 10 and a half feet and 4.5 feet. And they do have examples of what the material and installation would be like. And so that's it for entitlements. Any discretionary project requires California Environmental Quality Act review, and this does qualify for what's called an infill exemption, which is allowed for projects that are basically within city limits, a certain size site, which this meet, no specific significant impacts for species, traffic, noise, so nothing out of the ordinary. And surrounded by development, which the site is, so it does qualify for that. And so in sum, you're here tonight to review these entitlements. The entitlements do require a ZDRB recommendation and town council approval. So the resolution before you tonight is a recommendation to town council. And the staff report outlines this, but just in terms of the ZDRB options, after questions and the applicant's presentation, public comment, we are asking for your direction on one of these three. One is to direct the applicant regarding any modifications, direct staff to provide a resolution recommending denial if you don't feel the project is appropriate, or adopt the resolution that is included in the packet with any modifications that the ZDRB may have to that. And that recommendation would recommend the town council approve the project with the conditions of approval provided and any that the ZDRB adds to the project, and find the project exempt from CEQA under that infill exemption. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Are there any questions that anybody has for Carrie? I have a couple, but I'll let someone else go first.
Go ahead. Somebody else can start.
Okay. My question, one of the things that strikes me is the setback on Jefferson Street. And you mentioned 15 square feet was the restriction. I think you meant linear feet. And it's been reduced to 10. And my question is a clarification. You mentioned that it could be perceived as being 17 because it's from curb to the building, but typically the setback is from the lot line to the building. And I wonder if you regard setback as being pertinent to perception, this being a parcel across from a park, which it is kind of like an endless setback in terms of that, perceivably. Not endless, but fairly generous. Or does it have more to do with massing?
So thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. So for me, a 15-foot setback is usually, when you think about that, it's like the front lawn of a residence. If you think of sort of the very particular, up to wherever the property line is, whether that's back of curb, front of curb, it can vary to certain places. In this case, on Jefferson, the sidewalk has to be against the building because PG&E won't allow it to be any further to the west because of their infrastructure. They don't want it covered up by anything but low plants. And so what's happening is, yes, there is a certain amount, 7 feet of right-of-way that is all landscape buffer between the curb and the actual property line, and then the 10-foot, which includes the 5-foot sidewalk and another 5 feet of contiguous landscape. So there's really, from the building out, a 5-foot sidewalk, and then, let me do my math right, 12 feet of landscape before you get to the street. And so to me, it's more that spatial perception of from the street back. So I wasn't actually thinking about the park as an additional setback. I was more looking at, what's typical if it's, curb or back of sidewalk is where your property line is.
And is one of the intentions of the setback deviation to benefit the neighbors so that the building is further from one or more of the neighbors?
I'll let the applicant answer that. In their description, it was about, if they had another 5 foot off the building to make the building kind of work from a retail standpoint, they would have to shift it all over and you'd end up losing parking because the parking has certain requirements in terms of the depth of space and the depth of the aisle to be a functional parking lot.
What is that depth? Right now it's at 50, which seems rather generous.
So usually you have 18 to 20 for a parking space. And yeah, Aaron can look at what the actual code is. I can tell you what's typical for a workable parking lot, which is...
Also ask the applicant or the architect. But that was another question that I had that I was going to bring up later. The other question that I had to bring up with you.
Another clarification on the setback?
Yeah.
And sorry if I missed it. So the 15-foot setback, is that a function of classically how you look at the front versus the side property? So
Correct.
the front setback in this case would be on Humboldt Street? Is that what's...
So the front is actually on Jefferson. The code says that whichever side has the larger width, that's considered the front.
Okay.
And so once the lots are merged, Jefferson will be the front because it'll be the wider width. So that's where the deviation is being requested. In review of the general plan discussions, that was also the intent in the general plan that the building be sort of more oriented towards the corner and then Jefferson
Right.
with the parking off of Humboldt.
And what would the side setback be? Would that then be like 5?
So the side setback is actually determined through the master development plan process. It's not an actual setback.
Okay, I see.
And so has that, staying on the setback, I'm looking at the plans, it says it's like 7.7 feet
On the north.
on the
that's-
north
yeah.
side to the property line.
Correct.
And
That's what they're proposing.
That is adequate? Or that is something that we can,
That is something you can comment on, but it
Okay.
is, there is no actual metric in the development standards that they need to meet. It is set through the master development plan
Okay.
process.
okay. And is that the same with south
Yes.
setback
Yeah.
on Humboldt? Okay.
The reason I wanted the clarification, because I think some foreshadowing, I mean, when I think about the introduction of a new building, I always think about the surrounding buildings, and there's residential, obviously, because it's a residential block, but then across the street, there's a few additional retail or commercial. And I'm noticing the setbacks on Humboldt Street for those isn't quite deep, and I don't know if that's just a function of being grandfathered in or whether exceptions are granted for those properties. And again,
Yeah,
it's
I
a
don't-
discussion
that's a-
topic for later, but there's always the question of treating a parcel as its own thing versus treating a parcel as a part of a streetscape. So that's why I was trying to just decipher on what exactly the setbacks were addressed to do universally versus what's happening in this particular lot adjacent to others. So it's not really a question, but that's why I was asking.
Understand.
Carrie, my other question was having to do with how do the mechanics work if you've got an you've got basically 3 condo units, 2 independent, 1 owner occupied, and then 1 that is deed restricted, but part of the third, which is the retail space. Right? The smaller studio unit is part of the yellow zone, the
Correct.
third condominium, but it's also deed restricted, which doesn't make the retail deed restricted, but
Correct.
it's part of the same unit.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, so it basically says whoever owns the retail space would also own that studio unit, and they would have to rent the unit at that deed restricted rate, at that low income, to a low income household. And so they couldn't do anything but that. And
how is that? How is it monitored? Like,
So the town of Yountville actually has a contract with the city of Napa's housing authority and they do all the monitoring for the town and to make sure that it's being rented, it's a qualified household, and that they're doing what they're supposed to in terms of that unit.
okay. I still have questions about that, but maybe it'll come up later.
Okay.
Okay.
And we have the town attorney here too, because I know this was something that we kind of went through together. But yeah, basically it's did you have questions about the owner occupancy unit as well or no?
No, it
Okay.
was mainly having to do with the studio.
Got it.
Anybody else have questions?
I wondered about condo map. I haven't run across that term. Why would there be a condo map? Why is that beneficial, or what's the purpose?
So a condo map allows them to potentially, it's basically a subdivision of land, only with airspace, not with land on the ground. And so the applicant can probably talk a little bit more as to why they're interested in doing that. Typically, you would do that if you have a condo building, then you can sell each of the units separately. They don't need to be sold, though. It just makes them separate APNs, and basically like a single-family home lot, you could sell it separately.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
One question, possibly for Mackenzie, but it's open, is with regards to SB 9, if a property is zoned commercial, what is the relationship to that particular state law?
SB 9 applies to single-family zoned lots, not to commercially zoned lots.
Is this a commercially zoned lot?
Yes.
I guess that begs the question, if the condominium portion of the building is the commercial, ground level commercial, but has a residence in it, then how does that, what are the mechanics of that? I don't understand how that can, it seems like it would require a 4th condominium to be the studio, so that could be residential, so it's not part of the commercial entity. Is that what you're getting at?
No, not at all.
Okay.
What I was pointing out, I was asking whether the requirements by the SB 9 law applied to commercial properties. This is a commercial property, and the answer was no. It has nothing to do with the number of condos.
But the residence, the studio, is part of that commercial property.
Correct, but it doesn't reclassify the property as residential. That was my assumption, my question. So it wasn't about
Correct.
the number of
Yep.
anything. So that's something I want to get into.
Yeah, and Chair Miller, in terms of how one person owning retail plus the studio would work is, if you think about it, I mean, if they weren't doing a condo map, it would be one person owning the retail and the 3 units, and those 3 units would be rental. So in this case, the person who owns the retail would have basically a small mixed use with 2 other condos next to it.
Okay.
And they could sell condo A or condo B, but they could not sell the affordable.
Correct, correct. And I did actually talk with the person who administers the City of Napa's housing, affordable housing, and he said, yeah, he didn't have a problem with that. It's all something
Okay.
that can be taken care of with the regulatory agreement.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody? Would the applicant like to come up and present?
All right, we did try this before, so let's hope that it's going to work. All right. That's exciting. So good evening, Chair Miller, Vice Chair Zagorczyk, members of the board. My name is Kirsty Shelton, and I'll be making the majority of the applicant presentation tonight. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and it is great pleasure that I present before you. And I want to give a great thank you to Carrie Svadstrom and Director Heacock. They've been really wonderful to work with, and as you can tell by a very thorough staff report and a very thorough presentation, we have been busy. I'd also like to acknowledge the retired Director Borba and the interim Director McNabb and John Ferns and both the retired Director Rogers and the current town manager, retired manager Rogers and the current manager Roston. We have worked extensively with staff. I'm here tonight with key members of the team. I want to introduce in the audience, we have Pam and Kent Hallen, who are the developers of the project. Colby Hallen, who is the retail tenant and founder of the Hunter Gatherer retail store, who's the retail tenant. We also have Jeff Dodd, our legal land use counsel, and we also have the new architect, Adam Lehner with Borges Architectural Group. And as you can see, this is a extensive team of design consultants and other consultants. Although the general plan was ultimately adopted in 2019, it started in 2015. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but as you can see, the applicant has been working for over 3 years with town staff, submitted almost 2 years ago. I've been involved in the project since July, and I have been working with neighbors, residential neighbors, adjacent residential neighbors, the commercial neighbor across the street, stakeholders, listened to the entire ZDRB meeting and transcribed it, so I didn't forget anything. I also listened to the general plan redesignation meetings, and I feel like I'm very familiar with what the intention and vision was. So I do want to talk a little bit about the setback and the changes that we made. First, I kind of want to point out something that is a different interpretation. The previous staff report and a lot of the conversation at the ZDRB looked at Humboldt Street as the front. In further conversation and working with current town staff, we all ultimately determined the actual front setback is Jefferson by the length-width ratio of the lots. So I wanted to kind of talk about the main conversation that was before the ZDRB was actually the Humboldt Street setback. So now that Jefferson is the front, we're going to see in a minute the actual setbacks. I just wanted to talk about that there is a little bit of a change. And we actually moved the building closer to Humboldt, and that was after a lot of conversation and walking through town a lot and looking at the interface between the sidewalk, where the sidewalk was to be located, and where best to put a retail building. So not only is the flower shop closer to the building by about two and some change feet towards Humboldt. It also gave some more protection to the neighbor. The Jefferson Street elevation is kind of stuck at where it's at. There's no request, that's where the actual setback request is, and I'll go into a little bit of detail. So I just wanted to discuss about the siting. So I did put a blow up of the setback reduction that we're requesting, and I also have the setback plan, page 51 of the master development plan, very easy, so we can look at how the buildings interact with the neighbors and the setback on both Humboldt and Jefferson. So now that Jefferson Street is the front setback, we are asking for a 5-foot setback reduction, and what you see here is actually 19 feet, and I think earlier, the only mistake that I found from Carrie's report was the 17, and maybe there's something, but we can look more into detail. But what I have is a 19-foot setback from curb to building. And again, you can see the electrical vaults, and then you can see a planting strip, and then the sidewalk. The sidewalk has to be right next to the building because of the PG&E gas line and some other infrastructure. Most importantly, what I wanted to bring to your attention is that setback reduction by 5 feet is really because of this corner entrance. If the setback met the standard, it would be pushed back 5 feet this way, and the entrance to the retail would be further away. And if you've walked that corner, kind of like a triangle, it's already kind of awkward and far away from the actual crossing on Washington. So bringing that building further, we really felt like it was an important design component. I thought Carrie did a great job of showing kind of the before and after, and the one thing that really brought to my attention was how much more landscape this new project has. I won't go into too much detail, but we spent a tremendous amount of time with really coming with a very robust planting plan. We have a modern palette. It's drought tolerant, has seasonal varietals. There are some plants I want to bring to your attention. This is the creeping fig on the far left. That is one of the elements that the building is proposed to have. I also wanted to introduce the scarlet oaks. The current flowering, we call them stinky pears in my family. The current flowering non-ornamental pear is proposed to be removed. We did have an arborist come to the site and a biologist review all the trees. And not only are they in poor health, but also from a design aesthetic, the new trees are going to really help highlight the introduction to the retail. Scarlet oaks actually kind of looks like a maple. We are proposing as big as trees as we can get, 36-inch box. The applicant or the developer actually has the nursery picked out and is going to go actually hand pick them, and really is going to be looking for the tallest trees of the same symmetry. Surprisingly, they grow 2 feet a year. It says 2 to 3 feet a year for the first 10 years that it's planted, and then it starts to slow down. But they get quite large and tall, and I think they're really going to be a nice canopy and a street tree. I also wanted to bring this, what we call the unintended consequence plan. There was a lot of conversation from that June ZDRB of to step back Jefferson and to just make the FAR comply. Let's get smaller units in there. Let's not do an exception. And I wanted to show that we did that, and we immediately presented it to town staff. We had a meeting with both the planning directors at the time and the manager and said, we wanted to share this with you and get your thoughts. And John Ferns was also in that meeting. And we showed them this model and showed them the new plan, and we discussed why we really wanted to go with, why we didn't feel like it really met what we heard from that meeting. And this Jefferson step back is proposed to be 5 feet. All the residential open space would then be pushed onto that front barrier, or it would have to be in the back. And what we were mainly concerned about with such an ultra luxury and Keystone property was that residential chairs, things like that, may end up in that area, and it might kind of clutter the look. And so it was really important for the property to have a more robust open space. The other thing I wanted to bring, which in my opinion, I think the Humboldt Street is the most important to come from Washington Street. It's a very open view of Humboldt, whereas Jefferson is very shielded from the park. But what it did is it showed all the rooftop HVAC and the varying roof lines from that Humboldt elevation, and we just didn't really love it. And I think, ultimately, the town staff agreed the third residential would provide that symmetry. Affordable unit is very well received, and they proceeded to give us direction to shield the residential open space from the neighbors and to provide that symmetrical look. And what that did is what you see today is that courtyard garden that is very much protected from the front view and also the neighbors. And it provided that studio unit to provide the symmetry of both Jefferson and Humboldt. And while I'm here, these are the two condos. One of them is proposed to be owner occupied and most likely sold. It's one of a current development trend that is kind of happening all over the valley. And it's very exciting because it really helps projects be financed and be built. And I'm happy to answer more questions. Let's see. I did want to discuss the revised plan and understand that, to be very fair and honest, we really want to be before the ZDRB and get your comments on a plan that we really like and have spent a tremendous amount of time to make sure it meets the objective standards and that it really meets the objective of the general plan and the zoning. And what we did was really provide that. The revised plan that we submitted yesterday was in response to some of these questions about the flat roof and the porte cochere and some of the things that we just felt were really part of the design and something that the applicant had been working on for over 2 years. And what that is there's no change to the second floor. The only change proposed would be the 2 areas on the first level that there already were covered parking would be proposed to be adaptable ADU, like adaptable accessible, universally accessible residential studios. Again, no change to the second floor. And now I'd like to really go into detail about the changes to the elevations, which I think Carrie already did, so I'll probably go through fast.
Can I just ask a quick question regarding the revised plan? You talked about your preferred plan. Is it the revised plan or the plan that's before us that we're evaluating right now?
Well, what we'd really like to hear is the ZDRB's comments and hear from the public and the neighbors about the comments of the project and hear and come up with something so that we can come back to you. You know, I'm new to the project, the architect's new to the project. We heard comments on a project that looks much different. So really what our objective tonight is to get the ZDRB and the public's feedback, come back and make a revised application.
Is the revised plan and the unintended consequence plan the same thing, or is that?
No, the unintended consequence plan is if the elevation on Humboldt were to be open. And the other thing I want to discuss about the unintended consequence plan and the reason for the flat roof, which I'd like to just kind of go into real fast and then come back to, is there's a requirement for solar to be on residential areas, and the goal for this is really for it to be kind of like a timeless design. And the 4-foot parapet allows us to hide those solar panels for the residential, the required solar panels, and the mechanical to be away from the neighbors. And we really felt that that was important, whereas any like a hip roof or anything, you would really see a lot of those solar panels because they would have to be on the south elevation, which in my opinion is the prettiest elevation, is the most important elevation for Washington Street because it's right there on Humboldt. And so that's where the solar panels would be if we did a big hip roof. And the flat roof, although we were really proud that we were able to reduce it by almost 2 feet. It is 4 feet taller than the height limit, and that's with a 4-foot parapet. So that's 8 feet to the top of the plate of the second floor of livable area than the allowed height. So though it feels massive, it's actually, the plate height would be 8 feet less than what the allowable height would be if we did do a hip roof and the architects here, we can get into more detail. So to go back to your comment, Chair or Commissioner Henthorm, we really just want to hear all the comments on this revised plan. We want to hear from the members, we want to hear from the public, and we want to come back for final action.
Well, the reason I asked that is, my understanding is what we're going to be commenting on is the project that's before us, which is not the revised plan. It's the plan that's in the documentation we have. The revised plan, if that ends up getting submitted, is going to change a lot of what we would or could comment on. So we're going to be commenting on a plan that's before us that potentially we could be spinning our wheels and wasting everyone's time if you're simply going to submit a new plan that's going to provide new rules and waivers and concessions and things. So I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to understand, because we only got that revised plan late yesterday. So there hasn't really been any time for anybody, including staff, to really evaluate it.
I absolutely agree.
So I just...
We didn't want to continue again. We really wanted to get this application, this design before the board in a public meeting and hear comments. To be very clear, the design from the revised plan, from the plan that was submitted and analyzed by staff, the architecture is identical except for one elevation as visible from the public street. So I'd like to kind of proceed and hear your comments and suggestions, see if we can incorporate it and come up with a plan that the board is happy with. And, I'll continue to work with the neighbors and hopefully come back with a project that, meets the objectives of the general plan zoning ordinance and is something that can be built and, before Yountville.
Sorry, one last clarification. I apologize for digging in. Can you remind the intent of presenting the revised plan? Can you share the why behind it here?
Could we maybe finish the slideshow first and then
Okay.
ask questions?
I guess so. It just knowing why it's being presented, I think, will help me listen in the context of what's being presented if it is in fact a revised plan. So but I do appreciate that we do need to get the applicant finished.
Yeah, again, I'm new to the project because it's July. I will share the applicant has been working with staff for 3 years, and albeit multiple different staffs, my opinion is I kind of like to push reset, work with current staff and the current board, get your feedback and submit something. It feels like they've been doing everything that they've been advised, and they come forward and it doesn't work. And so I think what we're looking for is something that meets the objective standards, which this project does, besides the two things, the setback and the FAR, and those are integral to the quality of this project. Having nice-sized residential units, the 800 square feet, is critical to having a workforce housing unit that is of like a 500 square foot studios could attract transient workers, whereas a 1,000 square foot one bedroom with a den is more attractive to a professional, a young family, a more long-term tenant. We're really looking for, providing something quality in a really important location. So we felt that those two were very critical, even the flat roof, and looking for a real timeless design. We didn't really want to showcase solar panels. So we wanted to come before you and explain to you all these reasonings of why we tried all these different opportunities on this property and why we ultimately came to this plan. And so I think I've already explained why the flat roof is important. This slide is an important one that I'd like you guys to see, because on the bottom left, I did hear the floor, this window right here, the last plan was blank. And they heard, the comments were no blank walls, and so then it came back with a window. It actually, half of it is the trash, so it's a little misperceiving of the area, but if you see the floor plan, this is the covered trash area, and this is a dressing room currently. And so what they proposed in the most recent application that's before you is spandrel glass, which is like a privacy glass. And we just wanted to show an opportunity and hear your feedback on this other opportunity, which is a wood inlay shutter similar to the Flower Shop Street elevation. This is the Humboldt Flower Shop elevation. I think you guys understood the condo map, that the affordable unit that you see on the second floor, the reason that massing was so important is to really hide the roof line of the other apartments, the condos. And so we felt like having the symmetry of the windows on the top floor, it does have the 5-foot step back, because that affordable unit most likely will be a workforce housing unit from one of the managers or the retail, to attract good quality professionals to come work, to be able to have most of the people who works in a retail store meets the income qualifications. And so it's going to be easier to manage that lack of accessories up there on the second floor. So the revised plan does have this as a potential housing unit here, and that would be having windows. That's the only change to the street elevation. Everything else stays the same.
But the revised plan is the one that we're not. Sorry, the revised plan is the one that we're not considering tonight. It's a separate thing that you would like us to consider and give you feedback on, but it's not what you've submitted.
We'd like to hear your feedback on the architecture and things that you like and that you don't like, and so that we can see if we can come up with a plan that would meet your objectives. So you can opine on the current plan or the revised plan, both of which look identical except for this one elevation with these two windows.
Okay.
So we're thinking of it as a conceptual conversation. We're not looking for we're just looking for feedback. I did want to kind of outline changes in response to meeting with the adjacent neighbors. In meeting with them, we came up with an idea to make all these high windows. There was 2 windows in the original plan, now there's only 1. And then this north elevation that is adjacent to the north property owners are clear story. And so again, like Carrie explained, it'll be over a 5-foot height. They are different in design, but the same size and shape, because these 2 are opaque because they're in the bathroom.
What was the previous slide before this one?
The
Oh, okay.
parking lot view.
The east
Yeah.
view elevation.
And this is the north. I think this was similar to the original plan, but not very detailed. And I hope that you guys appreciate that we went to a lot of detail about the wood inlay on these elements. And the left-hand side is the design inspiration, and the right-hand side is the proposed. The antique door, I don't know if it was mentioned. I don't think it was mentioned, but this door is actually on hold. So what you see is actually what you're going to get. And then the wood inlay with the smooth stucco is a design element that was taken from a north end of town.
Those are inset windows, not inlaid windows, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Wood inlay inset windows.
Are they wood inlay?
I think so, because it's the architects here. I would call that wood inlay. At least I did on the application.
Casing is wood.
Yeah, but inlay is different. Okay.
Okay.
Continue.
I'll let the architect answer that if you don't mind. I'll invite him after I'm done. And most importantly, I really want you guys, it's my pleasure to introduce Colby. Colby Hallen successfully operated the hunter-gatherer retail store from 2016 to 2020. During that time, she fell in love with Yountville, and she bought her first house in 2017. And she's a local women-owned business who's dedicated to supporting local artisans. And I'm really excited to look forward to having her back here in Yountville. And I'm just going to stand next to you.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for your time tonight, and Carrie, thank you so much for going through kind of the detail of the project. It was very well described. I just wanted to be here tonight to answer any questions you guys have, along with Kirsty, but also just to say that, as Kirsty kind of also already mentioned, as most of you know, like, Hunter Gatherer was here for 5 years. We lost our lease. We're just looking for somewhere to settle back in town. I think we're a known quantity. The only addition, and I do want to make it clear that it's not going to be a second storefront. The only addition to the business would be adding the flower shop. So it would all be like owned and operated as one business. And I think that's it. Oh, one of the elements that we wanted to talk about, and this was like early on with Steve Rogers when we were talking about the art component. I asked Steve, well, what would the town prefer? Do you guys want money in the art fund, or do you guys prefer for people to do something on their own? And he had told me that no one actually had ever proposed doing their own project. So what we decided to do is somehow incorporate the bike rack into a sculpture. So obviously we have not found an artist yet, and this is just very conceptual. But the idea is that it would be an oak tree, and the root system would actually be the functioning bike rack. So that is one thing that I think we really wanted to like articulate on that Humboldt elevation, is that this is really going to be like a showpiece and something that we think will be like a really beautiful element as you're coming up Washington, and also create like a nice buffer for the neighbors, like continuing on to Humboldt. And there's a lot of pictures of the store. In case anyone isn't familiar, our space originally was next to R&D Kitchen. We were there for almost 5 years until we lost our space during the pandemic. Just is something that we are trying to not only cater to tourists, of course, but it was always meant to be a modern take on a general store and be really like a meeting place and a hub for locals, and convince everyone that you can shop local instead of shopping on Amazon when you need something. So I'm really thrilled to be able to work with you guys and hopefully come back to bringing, you know, something unique and different to the town, and work with artisans from all over the world, local products, and really just bring something special and unique to Yountville. So thank you. Oh, we already talked about that.
Okay. Picture of the flower shop. With that, we did prepare the 3D video that we'd like to present. Staff asked if I would do it. Is that okay if I go ahead and push play?
Sure.
There is no sound, so if you don't mind, I would attempt to ad-lib. This is the corner entrance. This is a true scale. Adams Company modeled the entire neighborhood true to scale. So that is one very big effort the applicant made. The top window and the 2 flank windows are intended for a grand entry into the retail store, and they are used for clear story. So they are included in the FAR, but not included in the building area. It even has the right artwork in the...
One other thing that I forgot to mention is, as far as the landscape, the Scarlet Oaks, part of the decision to go with Scarlet Oak is not only because of the color in the fall, but also they are a narrower and taller tree than what is there. So we just felt that it would fit the scale of the building a lot better.
And that is the creeping fig that you can see on the building. That may not be that clear on the architectural elevations, but this is what it is intended to look like. And again, as described, the sidewalk will be ADA compliant, but has to be next to the building because of the utility vaults. And here's the flower shop. It was really important to have that location to the street. One thing I did want to mention on the porte cochere, the wall, this is the project before you today, the wall is set back 5 feet from the fence, and before it was all the way to the fence and all the way high. So there has been dramatic changes where now it's open and it's set back 5 feet.
From the neighbor on Humboldt.
Correct.
Okay.
A total of 10 feet. Building to building. I did confirm this building is at the peak height, 30 feet, the one adjacent across the street. And it is grandfathered setbacks.
So it's not really showing the little studio apartment.
Correct.
envelope, correct?
Yep, this was prepared for today's hearing. And in addition to the video, we did work with staff to come up with some neighbor points of reference as using this model so that we could articulate the impact to the neighbors. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, the applicant, the architect, myself, we're all available.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a
No?
question of staff, so we can save that after. the
Okay.
applicants.
And I have a comment. I can start with that,
Sure.
unless you have questions.
Nope, go ahead.
I mean, this is clearly a complicated project, and I was remarking that it was June since we were last here. I can't believe that much time has passed. And, I appreciate all the work that went into it. These processes end up sometimes getting caught up, especially with a lot like this and with a lot of neighbors. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion, public comment. But before we get to that, I will share my appreciation for the amount of thought and effort that went into revising it. I can't speak to what happens next, but I didn't want to lose that effort and thought that went into try to figure something out. And there was a lot of change from the first version that we saw last summer. So obviously we have a process to get through, but the finishing and the details and whatnot, there was a lot of attention paid, so thank you.
I have access to everything if we need to show any other plans.
Okay.
I had a couple of questions regarding landscaping, just to start with anyway, and I want to echo what Mike just said. I mean, clearly you guys put a lot of work into this since June and took a lot of our comments to heart and implemented a lot of changes, so I appreciate that. But one question I had, this presentation and the way I hope the project is ultimately going to rely heavily on the landscaping, not just the planted trees and things, but also window boxes and planters on patios and things. What is the plan? As a former landscape designer, I know that the first thing to be neglected are window boxes and potted plants. So what is the plan? Who's going to be responsible for that? Is that going to be the residents who are responsible for keeping those things going? Or do you have a plan for just someone to maintain the landscaping overall?
We would be maintaining it as the owner and retail tenant. Our company would be in charge of all of that, because I think you're correct. So we've discussed that early on, that even if there are condos, that there would have to be a stipulation that there's full access and that we're in charge of the landscape and landscape maintenance rather than any potential tenant.
Okay, that's great, because,
Yeah.
that's going to be a big component in just softening the project and the beautification of it. Another question I had around the trees, the scarlet oaks. I love the idea that you guys are focusing on the fall color because I think that's a huge asset that Yountville has. But I just wonder, 70 foot, they're 60 to 80 feet tall. The building is 30 feet, so that's at 70 feet, that's more than twice the height of the building. So did you guys consider that? Particularly if they're fast growing, like the way it's rendered, I mean, that height is perfect, but that's more like a 15, 20 foot high tree. So I'm just wondering, are these going to get too big? One, just for the scale of the project, and also possibly for sidewalks and heaving the concrete and that sort of thing.
I think one of the reasons that we considered them is the root system was something that wouldn't affect the sidewalks is as much as like some of the other options that we were looking at. I know like sycamores, for instance, like aesthetically are great, but that the root system is different, that it would affect the sidewalk. Also, we were trying to take into account that we are facing the Vandeleur Park, which has quite a few redwoods. So the scale of that in total would make a little bit more sense to have. And 70 feet is eventually what their like max height is. So I think it's going to be a while before they get to that point. But even still, I think that in comparison to the park, it made sense to us. It related to the park.
Okay, I mean, I would just encourage you to think about the scale further down the road, because it's not going to take 30, if they're growing 2 feet a year, it's not going to take 30 years for these trees to reach quite a high height. So just
I'm not a
something to
landscape
consider.
architect, but I'm a really good Googler. And I actually didn't know the scarlet oak. And I'm like a nerd when it comes to trees and birds. And I did enough research where it was shocking to see it. They did say 50 to 70 feet. That is accurate. But there was a lot of information on it saying that it's fast growing for the first 10 years, and then it really slows down. So I think for it to get 50 feet, I think we're talking 30 to 40 years if you actually do the math at 2 feet a year. So I do agree with you that, and I think even if the roots were okay, even at 50 feet, if the peak of the hip is at 30, eventually, I mean, it might be kind of cool to have, if they're not too close in proximity. I do also want to fully disclose that we can't talk to PG&E until an application is filed, and we can't file an application until we have a building permit. And so we have been working with staff that because that area existing already has the high-pressure gas line for the town of Yountville and already 2 substantial utility vaults. So we've designed them with the hopes that they're going to be in those locations, but we are going to be working with staff once we get information from PG&E that that tree is acceptable and that location is acceptable. So we are showing you a conceptual design, but I wanted to be fully transparent in that we will be having ongoing conversations at the building permit level. I also wanted to mention that we are doing CCNRs for the condos that have those flower boxes that'll have the maintenance clearly outlined in it.
Okay. I mean, I have some general comments, but is this just time for questions now? Or?
We'll leave your comments till after the public has a chance to
Yeah.
give their input.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question of staff. Not, anybody else have questions for the applicant? Okay. Are they required to put solar on the roof of the residences?
I believe that they are. The residences are required solar.
I actually do have a question of either you guys or your architect. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper on the Jefferson Street setback. I know we've determined that Jefferson is the quote-unquote front of the building, but it's actually a shorter elevation than the Humboldt elevation, which is contrary to what you had mentioned early on, I think, or Carrie, maybe you mentioned it, that it was
It's actually not the elevation, it's the actual parcel length.
and it's 100, according to the drawings, it's 109 in one direction, and let's see. Oh, shoot, I just lost it. So the lot line is longer on Humboldt than it is on Jefferson. building is shorter. So it feels a little arbitrary. That aside, the question that I had was, setbacks are typically measured from lot line, not from curb, but we've mentioned the curb a lot. I know that there are these PG&E boxes on that elevation, but I want to remind us that we're supposed to be thinking about setbacks from the lot line, not from the curb. And then your comment about the door to the corner, did you ever think about angling it? Or, because I guess what I'm hung up on is and I just was really concentrating on this as I was walking over tonight. It feels like the building, Jefferson Street at where it meets Washington, really squeezes down as it is. And then you add a building there and some trees in front of that building, and it feels like it gets very narrow. And I'm also cognizant of the neighbors on Jefferson, which I know we're going to hear from momentarily, that the building further towards the street seems to impact them in a way that is, if it was, if you weren't asking for the variance, it might not have the same impact. And I want to hear what they think about that. But the other thing that I was looking at is the whole building. If the driveway and the porte cochere were to shrink, then you could get your standard setback. And that squeezing of the foot of Jefferson wouldn't be so dramatic. And I'm wondering from the architect, what is the requirement for the driveway and the porte cochere and the width? Because right now it's showing on the drawings as being 50, which feels rather generous to me, given that a car is about 8 feet wide.
I can attempt to answer two of those questions, then I'll ask Adam to follow up. I think the entrance to because this is a commercially zoned property, and walking throughout town areas, we actually walked around with a tape measure and looked at retail areas that were set back from the sidewalk more than 20 feet.
When it was 102.
And we broke a tape measure. My point in that is that it felt really awkward for some of the retails that were so far away from the sidewalk. So by pushing to have a compliant Jefferson Street sidewalk, it would push the entrance another 5 feet from the sidewalk.
Awkward in that I have to take 2 extra steps, or
5.
awkward in,
Or, I don't know how many.
well, 5 feet, I can take 2 steps and walk 5 feet. And I have short legs.
We felt that the entrance to the retail entrance was important, and so that's why we're asking for
Yeah.
it. I do want to also
It
say
feels
that
like that can be a
decrease.
design thing, though.
It would
that-
decrease the size. And 24 feet is the current opening. So 24 feet is EVA. It's 22 feet with 2 feet shoulders for a fire truck or a garbage truck.
Are we requiring fire trucks to be able to go in that parking lot?
Absolutely. Emergency access and a garbage truck. Or I guess
Are
a
they going to
garbage
be able to
truck's going
get
on the
underneath
street.
the height of the
No, but
porte cochere?
but you do have to have fire truck access 150 feet, so.
I don't know if there's like a visual to
It-
pull up, but also.
Is that something that maybe the architect could answer?
Sure.
Okay.
I think there's just something to be, like, to look at also of that, because the sidewalk on Jefferson has to be where it is because of the PG&E
Against the
vaults.
building, yeah.
And then it's the opposite on Humboldt. And then you also have the crosswalks. Really, we kind of played around with like the landscaping and the way to line the sidewalks up. that
Okay.
It feels like a flow of traffic and also meets all the ADA requirements. Because
Okay.
it was very, very wonky at first.
Yep.
And so I think when you're kind of looking at like the landscaping, it really kind of gives you that visual, and maybe like the video helps that too, of that it was completely chopped up, and that was kind of something that we really did a lot of maneuvering to try to make it just feel like there was a flow to keep the intent of that Washington corridor and, you know, the whole concept of that it's very
Yeah.
walkable.
It feels like the Jefferson facade is largely invisible because you would see it coming south on Washington and it's behind the park. Whereas you keep mentioning that the Humboldt Street seems to be much more prevalent, which is, again, I think one of the reasons why I'm questioning which is the front, you know?
We just
Okay.
read, yeah.
But I do think too that the video that Kirsty showed, it does show kind of what we've been trying to explain of that, like, that is what you really see. That
It
is
is.
what, like,
Yeah.
orients to Washington.
Yeah.
So,
I would hate to reduce the size of the retail,
The what?
the size of the retail, because
Yeah.
the first floor.
Right.
We feel like that's really important.
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you.
Do you have that random fact at top of mind, or can you speak to that, or is it remote? Do you have to look it up?
Okay, I'm diving into the firestorm here. Which question?
The question of the width of the driveway, the width of the porte cochere.
So
What's
typic-
the standard?
yeah, typically in parking, your
Yeah.
parking is going to be 18 to 20 feet. I think there's probably a city standard on there or town standard.
Yeah.
And then the drive aisles, we're seeing 24 to 26.
Okay.
So you start to end it up, and then you got the landscape buffer.
Okay.
Against the next, so
Great.
it's
Close,
not
but
oversized.
okay. Excellent. Shall we move on to public comment? Does anyone wish to stand and introduce themselves and their relationship to the property and speak to it? Yeah, please come up and address us with the microphone. That way it goes on the recording as well.
Okay. My name's Gary Jabbar. I own the estate here in Yountville, the Vintage House, Villaggio Hotels, Marketplace, and whatnot. First of all, from the first rendering I saw of the first design, I think and us across the street, we're super happy with the progress they've made and the detail they put into it, because it frankly looked like a warehouse originally. I think our only concerns are, and this is from somebody that builds a ton of stuff and have seen things go from architectural renderings and 3D views to reality, and they end up looking nothing like they did in a beautiful rendering. Our concerns are landscape, for sure, because that will make or break this thing in a lot of different ways. And then just finishes, to make sure that the way it's architecturally rendered, that there's some really good time and attention taken to details, window setbacks and those kinds of things. So it's and finishes and whatnot. So it's beautiful, because this is a beautiful town, and that's all. But we're supportive of it as long as the landscape's beautiful and the finishes are beautiful. I think it's come a long way.
Great.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else?
Hi, I'm Clark Thompson. I live on Jefferson Street.
Clark, you have to speak into the mic because it's
Okay,
being
I'll do
recorded.
that.
Thank you.
I'm Clark Thompson. I live on Jefferson Street, 6588. There's 3 homes there. All 3 of us are in a firm position together, being the neighbor to this building. We've been a neighbor to the lot for years. I've owned my home for 22 years. And I think it's great that all 3 of us see eye to eye on this. We know something's going to be built there, but we ask that you think of us. We are being impacted, the 3 of us, more than anybody else. Nobody's impacted more. And I appreciate your comment very much about your building, the hotel, which has turned out so nice and looks so good. So all the words that were just mentioned, I'm in agreement with. Let's make sure this is done right. But I do think that we need to consider these 3 lots, because even though we are aware that this parcel was going to be built on, we are the one impacted more than anybody else. Privacy, all sorts of things. Let's be mindful, we have a narrow driveway as it is, and if it's more narrow, it's just going to look ridiculous. I actually have one of the few 2-story homes on that street, and there was I think when, was it James Rossi or whoever built those two homes had to get a special permission to be able to add the second story. So I will be looking out on that flat roof, just FYI. I will be looking at air conditioning units and that type of thing. And then the others are going to be looking at cars. And I think the main thing is the approach to our homes. So we want to be cooperative, but we also want somebody to be looking out for us as, you know, longtime citizens that care about this town and appreciate what's going to be built there, but make sure that it's built properly and that they're mindful of our sunlight, of our vegetation, of our narrow driveway and our approach to our own home for what was looking very much like a Walgreens store. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Carl Straub. My wife and BB and I own 6584 Jefferson. You've probably seen my epistles that come, so I apologize if I wrote too much and made it too long, but we're concerned about a couple things. How much time do I have, by the way?
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Yep.
Okay. We're concerned about the process here, first of all. We keep seeing changes that we're not even aware of. We respond to drawings that are on the website, and now there's a revised drawing, and now and I feel like it's a freebie look. I'm used to due process. I'm an attorney, Mr. Dodd also. It just seems strange in the way this has come about. Second of all, while I appreciate Kirsty saying that they've had conversations with the neighbors, it's great to have a conversation, but we're not really being heard. There's still a 29-foot story wall, 8 feet from, or 7 feet from our driveway. Nobody's considered that all the olive trees they show, we planted, and they're all going to die because there's no sunlight to them once you put a 28-foot wall up. And I have submitted in my presentation from SolarCalc the sun's movements and how they approach it. We're concerned about noise. Why they said we have private. I don't know if I turn this off. Sorry.
You're doing fine.
If the other side is when we talk about noise, everything's elevated. I mean, they have courtyards, and then they have. I don't speak French well, so I'm just going to call it what it is. It's a carriage gateway, and that's elevated with more noise. And all of those openings face us, and in that corner, and Rich's old house on Humboldt. And we just feel that we've bared the burden of this. Nobody's impacted the way we are. Nobody. And so you have 8 to 5 traffic in there where you're going to have cars pulling out, doors closing, et cetera. And those back parking spaces are essentially 3 feet from the property line. And now you have, in addition, you now have owner parking spaces, the residents they call, and those are 24 hours a day. Plus they have a garage and they have 2 other additional parking spaces for guests, which I understand are second cars. But all of this impacts us on that back area, and we have nowhere to go. And we feel that this is just too much mass. And I ask everybody to think, and I'm on 4 minutes, so I'm moving quick. If you looked at the presentation, when did they show in any of their presentation, other than the original sketch, how it impacts us? They didn't show coming down our driveway. They gave you a picture of the wall, but they really haven't considered our properties and how this will impact it. There's lots of design changes, and I'm no architect, so don't take my chicken scratchings that I put on my response, but there's other ways to solve this. And all I've heard is entitlements, move the sidewalk, because it impacts the retail in the building. Nobody has said how it impacts us. And I do point out, I've given Kirsty a bad time about it, just so everyone understands that Jefferson's a one-way street, not 2 ways as it's shown on the drawings. And when you look at the proposals there, it narrows dramatically, especially when you have parked cars, large cars. I think it's just as hard on all of us. And so I would like to know, what is this meeting about? Is it about the existing drawing? Is it about the proposed? Because we met with Kirsty before we came in, and she said, oh, yeah, we're resetting. Oh, I'm going, well, then there doesn't have to be a meeting. And so I'm trying to figure out where all this goes, and that's 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. To be very clear, this meeting is about exclusively what has been applied for, which is the drawings that we have that are developed. I know they want our feedback in this meeting, but typically what happens is that these things get applied for and we deal with what's in front of us and not the other things that are coming at us. And we're also not a body that is, though we do opine on things, it's not so that the applicant has a bunch of information to go back and revise their drawings according to what our 5 tastes are. It's they need to do the design work and then present their drawings to us to opine on those drawings, and that's what we're looking at. And so, yes, there is mention of a revised plan. I think that revised plan potentially has a different path to entitlements, and the town attorney could speak to that. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about what's in front of us and what we've been given more than 24 hours, not much more, but more than 24 hours. The other stuff that came to us yesterday, I don't know that any of us had time to digest all of that, including yourself.
So point of order is the plan she's showing what was on the website as of Monday, or was there a new plan? This is the same plan.
You have to come back up to the mic.
Yeah, you need to speak into the mic, please.
That's okay.
Point of order, we're trying to follow the plans. And so the plans that I sent my response to had previously been on the website. And then I hear there's a revised plan that people are seeing, and then there's another plan. I just can't follow it all. I'm a little slow sometimes.
I think the plan that you have seen that was on the website is the one that we've seen that's in front of us today.
But the drawings on the website are different than what they showed on the screen on some of them because they've made changes. I'm trying to figure out what are we talking.
The website being the town's website?
Town Yountville planning
That's what they
website.
applied for in October, and that's what we're responding to.
Okay, because the drawings looks different than the drawings I saw on the website that they showed tonight.
There were a few drawings from the proposed plan that.
There are some renderings that they shared more recently. And that fly-through, is that what you're talking about?
The fly-through very quickly went by our driveway and didn't look down. That's okay. I didn't pay much attention. But the other side I will question on your front and back space, and this is more, our front yard is our backyard on 6584 Jefferson. So when we went through the development we put on that property on the ADU, our front yard is actually, and I wasn't told it was by length that had been determined differently in the past.
Yours would be a different situation because you have a reciprocal access easement going down for all 3 properties, so that's going to change how the configuration of the property is.
So that does make my backyard my front yard.
Yours isn't going to relate to the street, it's going to relate to the reciprocal access easement.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Nice to see all of you. Whitney Diver McAvoy with the Yountville Chamber of Commerce. I can't believe we're here looking at this plan again, but I am thrilled with the changes that have been made. I think that the applicant took a lot of time and attention and accepted your feedback and made a lot of changes that better reflect Yountville. So I'd like to give them credit for that. I understand that they're looking for direction, but before you is an item for action. So I would encourage you, if you're going to provide direction, to approve this item with direction that they can go back to, and this can go to town council and we can move forward. As you know, we desperately need retail in this town. I hear it every single day. I know you do too. And Colby's business was incredibly successful, and the only reason she's here is because she is here doing this project is because she lost her lease. So her store was beloved by many, including myself. I know a number of you shop there as well. So I'd love for this to go ahead and move forward so that we can all kind of put an end to this and move forward together. Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name is Pablo Luther, and I'm on 2008 Humboldt, so arguably much more impacted than most people, although I do appreciate their
Are you
sentiment also.
the property right next door?
Yes, the
Okay.
little blue house that's going to be overshadowed. Contrary to what, first of all, thank you for your service. I've been in your shoes. I was elected to the Los Altos School Board, one of the best schools in California. And I know it's sometimes a thankless job and you don't get paid for it. I never got paid for it either. But it's very fulfilling. Contrary to what the lady who was presenting said, I have never been contacted by anyone about these plans. I found out about the previous version purely by happenstance because I happened to be reading something that was put out by the town of Yountville, and that came to my address, to my home address in Los Altos. And so I spoke to the previous director. She was very helpful, and that's how I got to know about it. And that's why I did some research. I wrote a letter. There was this big, huge wall right next to this little tiny house that kind of dwarfed it and made it feel like, you know, we were right next to a border with a border wall right next to us. So regardless, I'm happy that, you know, there's been some changes. Some are fairly positive. However, some of the issues that the previous gentleman raised, and I've never met him before, this is the first time I'm hearing him speak, were pertinent to the discussion here. I have not had a chance to look at the elevations on my side in great detail, primarily because no one approached me and asked me for any input. They did not walk with me on my property line to see how it would impact our property. And so I have no idea how they came up with some of the changes with inputs from neighbors. So I would encourage them and your august body here to consider the neighbors' views on this. Of course, I understand property rights, and I do understand that, you know, things have to move forward. But it would be nice to have some element of congeniality, of making sure that, you know, people, no one's going to be 100% happy, but there should be some compromise in some of these things and take into consideration how one would walk in the other person's shoes. Thank you.
Thank you. Many of the changes that have been made are in response to a meeting that we had with this applicant earlier, middle of last year. And we were definitely considering impacts to your property and to the property that borders on the north side. So we're hearing you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else that wants to make a comment? All right, we'll close public comment and discuss this amongst ourselves.
Chair Miller,
Yeah.
we sometimes extend a courtesy option for the applicant to come and address public comments after.
Oh, okay. Would anyone from the applicant's team like to address the comments that they heard from the public comment?
Good evening. Again, Kirsty Shelton. I did meet with Gary Jabara and in part of our process, and then we also had a follow-up meeting with him with Colby, and he had asked for some architectural elements, such as construction details of how the windows were going to be, and we have emailed them to him and asked him for his support. So I do think if you would like to include those into your final approval, we could get them before you, and that could be something that the council ultimately votes on. We are just as committed to the landscape as the commenters, and we do have our commitment that we will be paying attention to that, and they will be picking out mature plants, and that it's a high I can't say it's ultra luxury, but it is, you know, a very high scale luxury retail, but it is definitely retail or local serving and, you know, medium income focused, I guess you could say. I also did meet with both Carl on multiple Zooms, and the changes that the slide said changes to neighbors were in response, and also the fence, the stopping of the sidewalk before the sidewalk kept going towards Jefferson. Multiple changes were made. I did follow up with another email and saying, do you have anything else? Here's the most recent changes, and I did not hear back. But I did meet both him and Clark at the site today, and I understand their concerns, and I'm absolutely committed to work with them and see if we can come up with something that really, one of the things that they did bring up was the entrance drive, the landscape landscape buffer kind of diminishes, and so I did say we would increase it so that he could have a landscape buffer, and the elevations that were in your packet, they do have from his driveway, and so you can see what I'm talking about. We are committed to increasing that buffer and keeping that landscape screening to follow.
Is the fence with the horizontal boards, is that being proposed by you guys?
Yeah, and it has to be metal because it's in the stormwater detention. And so that was one of the reasons why it was previously concrete. That was heard that it was too massive, and so it is reduced to a 6-foot metal horizontal slot.
And there are gaps between the boards?
No, it's the neighborhood privacy happy neighbor fence. I don't remember what it's called. Good neighbor fence, where the slats overlap a little bit on either side.
Thank you.
And Pablo, I'm happy to give you my information and walk the property with you. I did attempt to go to your house, and I apologize. I did also ask staff if you reached out that you could, that he had my permission to give my information out to any neighbors. I think, and I agree with Whitney. I was also a happy patron of Hunter Gatherer, and we are really excited to have it back.
Is there, would staff like to respond to anything that's come up from public comment? No?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Anybody have any further questions?
I just wanted to say one thing regarding some of the public comments, and also in relation to the letters that you submitted that we all read, and I read both in June and most recently. I know there's some things on your wish list that we just, whether we want to or not, can't accommodate. There's some things that are baked into this project, which Aaron mentioned earlier in the meetings, and the mixed-use nature of the project and the two-story nature of the project aren't up for debate. That's part of the general plan. So you are being heard, but we can't necessarily accommodate everything, all of your requests. So anyway, just wanted to mention that.
Well said.
Okay, so we're going to close the public comment and rebuttal and discuss this amongst the five of us. Does anyone wish to begin that process?
Somebody else can start.
Okay. I would echo the comments about the revisions. I think that the revisions go a long way to ameliorating the issues that were brought up in June. Was it June? July? June. I still have some questions about the, I mean, I guess I wish that what was before us took into consideration some of the guidelines for design a little bit more, and about our design standards, scale and massing, breaking up massing with long facades, no sloped roofs. I mean, they're just not included. There's one kind of nod to a gabled roof at the corner, but it's not an actual roof. It's more decoration. Multiple small buildings. It's really clear that the town has provided that direction to to fit with the residential scaled commercial architecture. It just feels like there's several things that are just kind of baked into this process at this point, and also kind of ignored. That said, I think, we have before us a project that has moved in a direction that I think is very positive. I hope that they'll take the comments that we've made today, and that we will you'll continue to hear into consideration. I remain concerned about the setback, more on the northwest and the western exposure. What's interesting is that I live on Jefferson Street. Jefferson is not directly north-south. It goes northeast, southwest. And so the exposure of sun that comes late in the day, I think the comment about the olive trees, they definitely get sun late in the day. Well, I face the same direction on Jefferson. So I know I'm not worried about your olive trees. I'm more worried about the massing and how it relates to that facade. There's little or no pedestrian-oriented, there's just no pedestrian space. Other buildings that have been presented to us have managed to do that, and this it's not included in this project. So there's a couple things that I'm just bummed that it feels like we do work on developing these design guidelines and standards, and that this project decided to disregard. But I think in the end that it's a design that is probably as good as it's going to get with this applicant, or it's going to go down a different path. And I'm not sure that's going to be any better. So I'm disappointed, but kind of relenting a little bit.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
Well, it's okay if I just jump in?
Sure.
So I was very happy with the most of the changes that were presented, and I think you guys came a long way. I agree with Mr. Jabbar that the devil's in the details, so I would love to see I really love the wood encased windows and doors, and the fact they're set back. I think that even though there's no step back on the Jefferson side, that those little details of setting back the windows and doors just creates more depth with the facade. I do think, I spent hours looking at this and printed off the renderings and sketched on them and everything, and I played around with peaked roofs on the two sections of the building that are on Jefferson. I actually felt, in my humble drafting, that adding peaked roofs just created more mass. But I do think there's a missed opportunity in a way to create. One of the things that still I look at it and think this still looks like a very generic commercial building is the parapet. I think it would be a good solution to that would be adding architectural details to the parapet, maybe making it a bit beefier. I printed off some examples, like maybe adding corbels, painting the parapet so it matches the trim of the building, so that this detail that you've created in the lower part of the building gets carried up all the way to the flat roof to just kind of take away from the fact it's just a basic flat roof. And I just think there's a lot of architectural detail opportunities there. Another way I think that we could make this project feel like less one complex is perhaps introducing other materials for the exterior other than the stucco, maybe painted brick or stone or board and batten, just some mix of materials besides just the stucco to help, add character to the overall project. I think doing those two things they're not going to throw the project into a tailspin and create any major redesigns. It's just going to add more character and architectural depth and interest to the project. So I would like to see more attention to detail there.
Do we have time for you maybe to make a presentation of your?
Yes, actually, if you could hit the slideshow. I think one of the biggest improvements was the Humboldt rendering. When you compare the old rendering to the new, I love the added flower shop store frontage. I actually am a fan of now that you've changed the porte cochere and gotten rid of that huge wall and taken it down some. I prefer that because it creates a courtyard for the parking and you're not just looking at a parking lot. So I think that adds a bit of elegance to the project. So I might be in a minority there, but those are my feelings on that. So
I can go next. Yeah. I mean, I think even when the zoning changed, you could probably predict that this lot was going to be a challenge or a problem because it's changing the nature. First of all, it's an empty lot. And when you change an empty lot to a building, already it is a very binary thing. Empty to something, there's nothing in between. Then you add the complexity of it being commercial, right? Even if it were residential, we might still be having a lot of these same conversations. But with it, being commercial, it was going to have a parking lot and it was going to have 2 stories. It doesn't have a tapered roof, but it is shorter. So I think there's the illusion of mass and then there's mass itself. So I think there are some complexities here. I think for me, the root of it comes down to the intent of the zoning, which was residential scaled commercial. And I go back to what I said back in June. The design is commercial with residential touches, right? So I would say if you say, oh, it's an old town block, wouldn't it be nice if this particular corner felt like you took a piece of Old Town and made it residential? I think that was the intent. I was there during the general plan session, which was drop a nice property that integrates, but give it access. That's not what happened, right? The first design missed that briefing and presented a commercial property and backed into it. I think that's my position. I'm repeating what I said before. And again, I was in the sessions when it was zoned as such. It's more of a Main Street style. I think it does look nice. I'm not taking away from anything that I said, but I'd be remiss if I didn't share my disappointment that it went in a completely different direction. These are the risks that are taken when changes are made. I do have a question, though this has been sort of on my mind and I wanted to save it to the end. If a property qualifies for the HAA, the Housing Accountability Act, right, based on the volume of units that it put, would the limitations on setback and FAR still apply, or would they be no longer in question?
It would be subject to objective standards that are uniformly verifiable at the time that they've submitted an application. Because there's no plan that sets side setbacks, like the code is silent on that and says it would be established through this approval entitlement process. I think that is likely not an objective standard that would be enforceable besides the front setback. Does that make sense?
So the front setback, which we're calling Jefferson, if the property were primarily residential or more than 2/3 residential and then subject to the guidelines of the housing HAA, then I guess my blunt question is, would the setback be enforceable under those?
Purely from a Housing Accountability Act standard, yes, they would be required to comply with that objective standard. Where other state laws come in, there may be waivers or concessions that would entitle them to deviate.
Okay. Because I think that the challenge I have, I'd be remiss if I didn't call it out, but I think the purpose of this alternate plan presented was essentially, you should accept this as it is, otherwise we'll change it to a 2/3 residential and it's going to qualify for the Housing Affordability Act, and then there's nothing you can do. Like that, I want to call it out for what it is, right? Just to make sure. And so the challenge then is that you say, oh, well, do you grant concessions on the setback and the FAR on the threat of it changing into an HAA compliant? And so that's a dilemma for me, because then we're establishing a precedent that all of our zoning guidelines are going to be held hostage by the threat of an alternate plan that would otherwise supersede town laws. And so then at that point, you're not actually adhering to anything at that point. I'm always looking at precedent in these sessions. What decisions do we make now are going to set the tone for later on? So the dilemma is okay, grant the concessions because we don't want to make these big plans, or not, and let the cards fall where they may, because ultimately it's not really up to us to sort of weigh the pros and cons of state laws being used to push designs through, right? So anyway, I'm not passing judgment on that, just to be clear. I'm not weighing things. I'm just explaining what I'm seeing specifically, and what I see is some of the challenges. But that said, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think that for what it is and where we ended up versus where we started, it does do a lot. And even if it were purely residential property, the challenge is when you put something on a property, it's going to have, shadows, impacts. It could have been a house, and we'd be still having a lot of the same debates about lights and massing. So I do want to point that out as well.
May I?
Yes, please.
Incredible difference, in my opinion. Unbelievable. I don't even feel like I'm looking at the same project. So I think my confusion, along with my fellow members here, is what exactly are we looking at? Because my brain keeps looking at the proposal, if you will. Forget the Walgreens proposal, let's call it that, okay? The newer one. But along with some of the changes that we're not really looking at, but we are looking at, because I don't mind the changes. I think actually they're a good attribute to the project. I think all the way from the setbacks to the way the sidewalk runs in front of Jefferson, I think it's a perfect segue to show the retail. I'm not real clear about things like the windows, about doing the spandrel glass versus doing the shutters. I actually think the glass is probably, in my opinion, a better idea. I think it extends that retail a little bit more. It extends the looky-loos who kind of want to be looking in the window. That's how people get pulled into retail, right? Being able to kind of look at the window first. I just think it sucks you in. I think the entry, I actually like the obscurity of it a little bit. I think that pulls you in as well, given the way the sidewalk runs on Jefferson, given the way the sidewalk runs on the opposing street. I think it's a nice introduction to the taller, massive structure that's behind Sotheby's, part of their annex, or if you will, the extension from the real estate office. I think again, it's a really well done job. I think consideration to the neighbors, I think from at least what we're hearing, or from what I'm understanding, it's been extended enough to the point of where do you have to then follow guidelines of what the town is going to require and by regulation, by ordinances, whatever we want to call this stuff, compared to now, where do we just deal with, how do we comply and help the neighbor, if you will, comparable to us really just looking at the aesthetic. Let's go down to the roof lines. I don't think that building needs gabled roofs. I think the entry, it works really well, but I think the parapet walls work fantastic for the building look itself. I think if you go down the Washington Street, it's amazing how many buildings along that corridor literally have parapet walls as well. They may have some hip roofs or gabled roofs, but they're hidden by either big trees or they're hidden by a parapet wall. You can go from Bushon all the way down. So I'm not understanding quite the difference maybe in all of our opinions outside of it being a little bit more aesthetic, which I think at this point is really what we're looking at, because it seems like the ordinances, the square footage, the FAR, all this other stuff is already kind of it's already there, right? I mean, we can't, that's really not so much subject to be talking about changing the setback and changing the sidewalk and that kind of thing. Am I correct about that?
Some of those are those aesthetic things are defined by the Washington Commercial Corridor and residential scaled commercial. Those are two different zoning characterizations. So this is more like the one that it's not in, the ones that you mentioned on Washington. So it's following a precedent that's on Washington, but it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be following a precedent for residential scaled commercial. So even though it continues with something that is in a different zone, it's like they're just not really paying attention to what it's zoned.
So it's considered commercial. It can be 2 stories. It can have residential in it. It needs to. And it can be across the street from, if you will, the building behind Sotheby's.
It's in a different zone than
A
that.
different zone because one's on this corner and one's on the other corner versus.
Well, because every property is zoned individually by parcel by parcel. So they just decided they wanted to do something different.
So in regards to the town, what's the caveat in regards to that as far as how you change that zoning? Because that's what we're talking about a little bit here, right? I mean, if you're going to get the building the way you want it with the setbacks that you want and everything, is that then initially kind of changing the zoning you're talking about, or that's already zoned strictly from?
It's, it was a new classification called residential scaled commercial, which had understandably some subjective elements to it. So I think what
It came up when the general plan was redone.
and so there are things we can't technically deny it on purely subjective.
So that's where my point, I think, was going. So really, you all as town management, if you will, we already know what's been presented here as far as all these ratios and setbacks, everything goes, is already something that the town would allow, right? Or is saying, yes, you can do that, or no, you, like we wouldn't already be here if this was like a no, right?
There are 2 deviations that are being considered as part of the master development plan approval, but otherwise.
That's correct. So there's 2 deviations, but the master development plan allows you to consider deviations, if you will, from the standards in the code.
And can the district design intent is a subjective standard? I mean, I'm sorry, yeah, a subjective standard. So we can say, like, we want people who are presenting in this zone to follow these intents, but they can choose to or choose not to.
It just seems a little, to follow the one intent when you're just across the street from everybody else who already has an intent set up, and then the intent is for you to follow a different zoning, if you will, when you're the last lot on that corner to ever really be developed anyway, right? And it just seems a little.
Well, but their neighbors are residential.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I think I would note too, or draw your attention to the findings that do kind of encompass broader neighborhood perspectives. And those are the findings that you really need to base your decision on. And that's how we try to ensure it's not too subjective or arbitrary when you come down with a decision. So that would be my guidance on that.
I hope I was making sense, because it's kind of like I look at it on the north side of town, kind of when you're looking at Restoration Hardware, if you will. The neighborhood right next door to that has got kind of the same implications. It's just maybe it's not the same height, if you will, but it's, I think, kind of set up the same way. I mean, there's literally residential next to it.
well, and that's all commercial on that side of the street.
Well, I understand.
And there's
Yeah,
different east side versus west side of Washington Street too, different requirements for design. It's all in the code.
Well, I say good job regardless. I mean, I think it's a fantastic job from where we were before, that is for sure. So if that's where we need to go, I say hopefully we can all work together to figure out whatever these little, how this thing needs to be tweaked, if you will, on some level to fit, if you will, how you're all feeling about it not fitting into the code, if you will, or the general plan.
Yeah, and you and I don't have the history that perhaps the other three do, so perhaps we're a little less, well, obviously, we're less disappointed that it didn't end up where perhaps you thought you were going to go. I also just wanted to say, I already formulated my thoughts and opinions before seeing the newly proposed plan, and I mean, they were generally positive towards what we're commenting on now. And yeah, I personally don't have any issues with the deviations, particularly if the setback deviation means that the project's going to move more towards the resident, Luther's residence on Humboldt. So I think as if it's a deviation that is going to be in favor of the neighbors, I think that that is a positive thing. And yeah, so I had another thought, but it just went out of my head. But anyway.
Kim, we haven't heard from you.
I know. Let me back up a little bit for a second, because there were a lot of positive letters about the project and about Colby and about hunter-gatherer, and I agree with all those. We want this to be in town. This is exactly what we've all been looking for. Our frustration, and that's not even what we're talking about today, because we want you here. Our frustration is that it doesn't seem like it meets what we have set up. I mean, it does not meet what is set up as residential scale commercial. And that's where my disappointment lies. And I think we have to look at, I have 5 things on my list. We need public engagement opportunities on the Jefferson Street side. That was part of how it was zoned. It was zoned to residential scale commercial in order to get more activity of the public and walking activity on Washington Street on that side. And I don't see that. Maybe the flower store is on that side, you know, something over on that side. Some seating areas, some cutbacks, some public spaces. There was a comment that the sidewalk had to be against the building. Well, it only has to be against the building if you put the building all the way out there. I mean, you could move the building back farther and get more spaces. We have to look at the neighbors. If you look at the views, view 2 and view 3, there is this big giant flat wall that faced the neighbors. And we just went through this on Oak and Vine. Remember, there was one of the houses that had no roof showing on that side at all. And we got them to change it for the sake of the neighbors. So it can't be a 2-story flat wall.
So can you specify which elevation?
Residential view 2.
North
The north elevation
north
of the
and
building.
northeast elevations.
We just went through this, and for the sake of the neighbors, we pushed the architect to make some changes, and they ended up putting some roof and making a lot of changes on that side, so it didn't look so commercial and such a big wall. And I think that goes to the peaked roofs. I mean, residential scaled commercial, I actually believe the building behind Sotheby's is residential scaled commercial, and that it looks like a house, even though it's commercial. And that's the intent of residential scaled commercial, is that it needs to look more like a house than an industrial building. FAR being over a little here or there, I can see, because it is kind of a difficult lot. I think the Porte Cochere, or however you pronounce that, is not at all appropriate. You would never see that in a residential neighborhood. I think that's really inappropriate, and I think it really encroaches on that neighbor. There are other ways to put, you know, like a small trellis or something over just the part over the driveway without building the wall and making it a heavy structure on that side. Public walkways. No big flat wall on that side. Yeah, I think those are my my problems with it. I think the changes that you made are beautiful. It's such a dramatic difference from the first time, but I think it just dressed up what you had and didn't address the residential scaled commercial part of it. And that's where we keep getting stuck on it. We want it to look like 3 houses on this lot that have commercial in them, you know, something like that. Go ahead. You
Sorry,
can add
I was just
something.
going to say,
No, go ahead.
what you were saying and then what Michael was saying about the precedent that's being set here is that in addition to this being residentially scaled commercial, the other parcels that were converted in the general plan were the parcels that go from Starkey to Padroni on the east side of Washington. And one of them is the parcel, the house that seems to keep expanding. If those parcels were to get developed with the same precedent that this sets, this town would be a very different place. It would change it dramatically. And so I think that's where precedent with this ends up being like, okay, well, that's what residential scaled architecture meant to the 5 board members and the council that approved this in 2025. So now we can, the floodgates are open.
Yeah, good point, because this didn't get the zone changed to commercial for
Right.
that very reason.
Right.
So that it didn't look like RH or something. It was,
And one of those
spent a lot
parcels
of
is owned by
time defining-
RH. One of those
Yeah,
parcels
yeah.
is owned by RH. And if RH were to look at this and go, huh, we could do that here.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So there's a lot of details that need to be looked at. The back view, like looking from the neighbor's driveway, is pretty intense. At least the unit that ends up against their property on the north side has to be shaped so that it looks
Or
more
broken up.
residential. Or broken up, yeah. Or moved to the other side on Humboldt or something so that it's not so heavy. As much as it's so much better and we want it to be here. But it didn't follow our recommendations from June. And it's missing the mark.
And yes, we want retail in Yountville, but unfortunately, Mr. Jabbar is not here to hear it. But we need retail. So I think he has a couple square feet available. Okay, what do we want to do?
Do we continue it again? Is that, I would vote for a continuation and hope that they make those changes.
In regards to those changes, can we be very specific about what those are, so we
I
feel?
thought
that-
I kind of laid them out.
Well,
I think what's difficult is that I think in June we kind of said you need to go back to the drawing board, and they went back to the drawing board and reskinned the same building and deleted a few of the really offensive massing decisions that were made in the earlier iteration. But it's the same building. It's a little bit less Walgreens and more something that isn't really what the town's general plan and the design recommendations and I mean everything that we work hard to kind of put in place to maintain the character of Yountville. It's still the same building.
Basically, yeah.
And I mean, it's a much prettier version of what we were shown in June. But it's, I think, part of what was lost is our request to go back and look at what is laid out in the recommendations and the intents
Of the code. Yeah.
and the zoning. So, do you want to make a motion?
Do we need to do it in a motion?
Yes, to continue, it would be a vote.
Okay. Do we have to give a date? We just vote to continue it. I would make a motion to continue it
To a date uncertain.
to a date uncertain. And hopefully it will come back in a good way.
Is that your motion?
It is, sorry. It's kind of a sad one.
I'll second that.
And a vote?
All right. All in favor?
So I just have a question. If, because I'm not necessarily in agreement, but so if I say nay, am I saying nay to, what am I saying nay to?
We would have
exactly?
to come up with another motion.
It just needs a 3 to pass.
Yeah.
It doesn't need unanimous.
Yeah, okay, so that was, yeah, so,
You can also propose your own motion, and it would be considered in the order that the motions are presented. So
Yeah.
if this one failed, then we would consider yours next.
okay, well, yeah, I mean, I was fine with the project with some additional architectural detail changes, and so,
First, we have to vote.
Yeah, so I think there's a motion on the table. We need to vote on that, and then we'll move from there.
Then you can make another
Okay.
motion.
Okay, say it again, and so say again what we're actually voting on?
A continuation for we're not denying it, we're letting them come back again if they choose to and make some changes to get our approval.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Is that a clear enough motion? Okay. All in favor? Aye?
To come back.
Yeah.
If you would like to.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, so I think it's 4-1.
I would hold out.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I don't know that it necessarily makes sense for me to make a motion since it's obviously not
No.
going to pass.
No, it's passed, so.
And
Yep.
Member
You have every
Henthorn,
right to not agree.
pardon me, I just wanted to clarify if he voted no or if you are abstaining.
I voted no.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear, what passed was a continuance to a date uncertain, so that the applicant can either abandon or reframe their proposal.
Hopefully, they will come back.
All right, administrative items, I'm seeing that we have none.
Nothing?
Ladies and gentlemen, you can leave, but please leave silently because we're still in a meeting. Thank you. All right, staff board reports.
My only report is be on the lookout for notifications about the town's Diamond Jubilee on February 4th.
Okay, okay, great. And then a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
No, I don't
Thank you very much.